Okay, guys, so we're looking at the very final section of Mark on the Wall, starting with this bottom paragraph on the second page. In certain lights, that mark on the wall seems actually to project from the wall is again an example of that relativistic representation of perception itself. And I think what's distinctive here in this opening sentence is that there's a gradually increasing sense of certainty surrounding this mark on the wall as we progress through the plot itself, which I suppose is some sort of conventional plot arc that is centered around the perceptive uncertainty of the mark on the wall. And then there's further information. Nor is it entirely circular. I cannot be sure, but it seems to cast a perceptible shadow, suggesting that if I ran my finger down that strip of the wall, it would at a certain point mount and descend a small tumulus, a smooth tumulus like those barrows on the South Downs, which are, they say, either tombs or camps. And so, again, the instability and hesitancy about the actual nature of the mark on the wall is a little less. There's a certain increase in the perception of this particular thing. But the trigger for the next stream of consciousness is the feeling that it would mount and descend, that it would stick out from the wall if the writer were to run her fingers over it. And it would descend a small tumulus, which is an old burial site that begins the next sort of introspective foray in the story. And that's where it comes, like those barrows on the South Downs, which are, they say, either tombs or camps. And again, the status of knowledge here is uncertain as well, the status of her understanding. So we've got, again, a fairly restrained portrait of the hesitancy of thought. But this importantly, of the two, I should prefer them to be tombs, desiring melancholy like most English people, which I can probably attest to, and I'm sure you can tell from my story choices. Again, the knowledge is uncertain, but there is, even in the status of knowledge, this sort of relativistic, subjective quality, as there is in the nature of perception, and as there is in the nature of all the absolute constructs that help us to orient reality. Knowledge itself is now relativistic in the writer's consciousness. And finding it natural at the end of a walk to think of the bones stretched beneath the turf, there must be some book about it. Some antiquary must have dug up those bones and given them a name. What sort of a man is an antiquary? And if you don't know it, it's someone who collects antiques, I wonder. Probably retired colonels for the most part, I dare say, leading parties of aged labourers to the top here, examining clods of earth and stone, and getting into correspondence with the neighbouring clergy, which, being opened at breakfast time, gives them a feeling of importance. And the comparison of arrowheads necessitates cross-country journeys to the county towns, an agreeable necessity both to them and to their elderly wives who wish to make plum jam or to clean out the study, and have every reason for keeping that great question of the camp or the tomb in perpetual suspension, while the colonel himself feels agreeably philosophic in accumulating evidence on both sides of the question. So this, again, this speculative narrative, I think, mirrors the allusive one to Shakespeare earlier on in the text. But I think it defines knowledge itself as a subject to kind of sad, distancing social rituals that are more concerned with status and empty pleasures. You know, we've got here this narrative about who an antiquary is, and I think the warning sign for us is the fact that it's retired colonels. It is those people like the word generalization that seemed to, earlier on in the story, be associated with Whitaker's table of precedency, which has begun, that whole foray of the mind has begun through that word generalizations, and the word general, again, has that military context. We can tell again that the war is looming here as a subtext. And it crops up again here. This is a speculation about what these retired generals will end up doing. Things that are being done here purely for the sense of status and self-satisfaction, rather than for the pleasures that they involve and their engagement with the activities. And we see this here. It's an agreeable necessity both to them and to their elderly wives who wish to make plum jam or to clean out the study. That these jobs, this antiquarian jobs that she's describing here, necessitates cross-country journeys to the county town so that they have to leave their wives. They have to travel. And that is an agreeable necessity to them and their elderly wives. They like to be apart. And so distance is at the center of relationships here in this story. And so we've got here, because of that, every reason for keeping that great question of the camp or tomb in perpetual suspension. And so really what we see here is the private concept of alienation in the relationship driving this speculative kernel in his professional life, that the colonel himself feels agreeably philosophic in accumulating evidence on both sides of the question. So he deludes himself again into thinking that the reason that he's so far away from his wife all this time is because he is doing something professional, but actually it's purely to just stay away from the person that he is supposed to be most deeply connected to. And so what we've got in that particular respect then is this extremely critical vision of the profession of the antiquary and the people that are likely to go about engaging in that profession. Again, I think they're allied in this story with all of what is represented by Whitaker's Almanac and all of that external reality of patriarchy. And then it carries on, there's the speculation. It is true that he does finally incline to believe in the camp, and being opposed, indicts a pamphlet which he is about to read at the quarterly meeting of the local society when a stroke lays him low. And his last conscious thoughts are not of a wife or child, but of the camp and that arrowhead there, which is now in the case at the local museum, together with the foot of a Chinese murderess, a handful of Elizabethan nails, a great many Tudor clay pipes, a piece of Roman pottery, and the wine glass that Nelson drank out of, proving I really don't know what. So, in this moment, in this speculation, this moment of this retired colonel dying, shows that he's attached to his profession, but again, for his reputation, and that his engagement with the profession is revealed to be superficial because of this sort of hollow quality that she creates for all of the artifacts in this museum through this listing of these disparate and disconnected trinkets of historical significance, which in the end are rendered to be insignificant. So where we start here again with this single foray into antique collecting and historical excavation comes from just the feel of the mark on the wall. And then all of this speculative anecdote is about the empty superficiality of the person she imagines being engaged in that profession. Here then is where the sort of universal and philosophical speculation takes place. No, nothing is proved, nothing is known. So there's a doubt again about the actual nature of knowledge itself that's constructed through that rhetorical trope of aporia. And if I were to get up at this very moment and ascertain that the mark on the wall is really, what shall we say, the head of a gigantic old nail. And so the questions here and the fragmented syntax, I think, give us this sense of what we call epistemic uncertainty, that knowledge itself is uncertain, but that uncertain nature of knowledge that is produced through the relativistic and subjective nature of perception is precisely the basis for this revisioned version of creativity, this revised version of creativity, that Virginia Woolf locates in her own stream of consciousness and her own psychological introspection. And that we see this here. The head of a gigantic nail driven in 200 years ago, which has now, owing to the patient attrition of many generations of housemaids, revealed its head above the coat of paint and is taking the first view of modern life in the sight of a white-walled firelit room. What should I gain? Knowledge? Matter for further speculation. And so there's again, what this mark on the wall is provisional and subject to sort of overlapping possibilities. That here, if we say that it's being revealed because of so many housemaids revealing the nail poking out of the wall just because they've constantly been attending to the wall through various sorts of housework, and that she's imagining the nail taking its view of modern life. What she wonders then is, what is the value of this particular speculation? I can think sitting still as well as standing up, and what is knowledge? So again, there's a demonstration, I think, here of the narrator's attachment to unresolved knowledge or unresolved truth, because it provides the impetus for speculation, and that uncertainty, or what we'd call epistemic uncertainty, is favoured over absolute truth or the illusion of absolute truth and certainty. What are our learned men, save the descendants of witches and hermits who crouched in caves and in woods brewing herbs, interrogating shrew mice and writing down the language of the stars? There's a huge sense of irony here about the people that supposedly are in charge of constructing and communicating knowledge. And the irony here is a total loss of faith in progress and rationalism. There's a sort of post-Enlightenment skepticism going on here about the way that people who are responsible for the production of knowledge are seen as a sort of occultist charlatans, people that are concocting sort of cult-like medicine. They're seen as being sort of out of what we would consider to be social orthodoxy. And the less we honour them as our superstitions dwindle and our respect for beauty and health of mind increases. So we've got here, I think, the suggestion that actually the people who consider themselves to be the bastions of rational thought and science and knowledge and learning, honouring them results in us having superstitions. And here, I think Woolf's telling us that those superstitions dwindle as our respect for beauty and the health of mind increases. So this is where I think you see the impetus and the rationale for this style of writing. That's what she's trying to give us here, is the beauty of the mind in operation. Yes, one could imagine a very pleasant world, a quiet, spacious world with the flowers so red and blue in the open fields, a world without professors or specialists or housekeepers with the profiles of policemen, a world which one could slice with one's thought as a fish slices the water with his fin, grazing the stems of the water lilies hanging suspended over nests of white sea eggs. And this here, this metaphor of thought that's provided through sensory imagery, I think captures the sense in which the beauty of thought is sustained only if it's not resolved into knowledge, and that you slice the world with your thought rather than just merely reflect it. And this is, I think, elevating the value and primacy of the mind over the value of external reality that we see throughout the story. And that we've got this image of thought siding almost the surface of the world, but remaining unresolved, hanging suspended over nests of white sea eggs. How peaceful it is to drown here, rooted in the centre of the world and gazing up through the grey waters with their sudden gleams of light and their reflections. And so in this state of unresolved beauty that is a metaphorical depiction of thought itself controlling reality, there's this desire to just be suspended in this act of pure consciousness, of pure thought. But then the external world intrudes once more. If it were not for Whitaker's Almanac, if it were not for the table of precedency, these perhaps symbols, we could call them, for patriarchy. I must jump up and see for myself what that mark of the wall really is, and nail a rose leaf a crack in the wood. There's a desire, I think, for certainty here. I think because this final depiction of the symbols creates a sense of resignation, that there is no escape from this external world that she is so dejected by and alienated from. Here is nature once more at her old game of self-preservation, And so we've got here, actually, in the act of desiring to work out what that mark on the wall is, it's a survival adaptation, and that personification of nature is giving us the sense that the writer knows that creating certainty about what this mark on the wall is the end of this mental and psychological speculation, and that her thought is threatening her survival in some fashion. Her survival depends upon her actually resolving this uncertainty, because it's going to stop her from going on these trains of thought which are dangerous. This train of thought, she perceives, is threatening mere waste of energy, even some collision with reality, for who will ever be able to lift a finger against Whitaker's table of precedency? The Archbishop of Canterbury is followed by the Lord High Chancellor. The Lord High Chancellor is followed by the Archbishop of York. Everybody follows somebody, such as the philosophy of Whitaker. It is based on antecedents. It's based on, the chronological inheritance of someone inheriting a job from someone inheriting money from someone, and that's how patriarchy perpetuates itself. The great thing is to know who follows whom. Whitaker knows, and let that. So nature counsels comfort you instead of enraging you. And if you can't be comforted, you must shatter this hour of peace. Think of the mark on the wall. So resolved thought then becomes subject to control and compartmentalization. She sees an analogy between the certainty that she has surrounding the mark on the wall as a sense of resolution that makes her thought just perhaps some other little factual trinket in a text like the table of precedency. And so that deliberate construction of uncertainty and irresolution is a way of escaping that. I understand nature's game, her prompting to take action as a way of ending any thought that threatens to excite or to pain. And so here, nature is trying to end this unresolvable thought because it's trying to establish order. The order is what will give the narrator mental health and allow her to survive, and it's almost a self-triggering, self-preserving action that's carried out through almost like a survivalist instinct. Hence, I suppose, comes our slight contempt for men of action, men we assume who don't think. Still, there's no harm in putting a full stop to one's disagreeable thoughts by looking at a mark on the wall. And so the key thing here is the contempt for men of action who don't think. This is exactly the world that is shaped by this approach that she resists throughout the story. And that this final sentence is a kind of sarcastic throwaway remark. There's no harm in putting a full stop to one's disagreeable thoughts by looking at a mark on the wall. Of course, that's exactly what she's been doing. She's been interrogating and embracing her unpleasant thoughts. Indeed, now that I've fixed my eyes upon it, I feel that I have grasped a plank in the sea. And I think here what we've got is this synesthesia, that she's seeing and grabbing at the same time. The perception again is unstable and unresolved, and shows us, I think, the illusory nature of what we'd call phenomenological certainty and epistemic certainty. It is an illusion. I feel a satisfying sense of reality which at once turns the two archbishops and the Lord High Chancellor to the shadows of shades, and that the resolution of her perception consigns patriarchal order to insignificance. Here is something definite, something real. Thus, waking from a midnight dream of horror, one hastily turns on the light and lies quiescent, worshipping the chest of drawers, worshipping solidity, worshipping reality, worshipping the impersonal world, which is a proof of some existence other than ours. This is what one wants to be sure of. I think the use of the rhetorical trope anaphora here, we keep repeating the word worshipping at the beginning of new sentences or clauses, shows us the narrator using a really sarcastic, sardonic tone here. The fixation with the external and the concrete is precisely what she is trying to evade here. But then there's this transition. Would is a pleasant thing to think about. It comes from a tree, and trees grow, and we don't know how they grow. For years and years they grow without paying any attention to us, in meadows, in forests, and by the side of rivers. All things one likes to think about. And so we've got this suggestion that, okay, this solid reality literally is made from wood in some places. Well, she's trying to locate a final sense of freedom through thinking about solid reality that's controlled by people, being made from something that for much of its life has been completely unaffected by humans. And so it's a source of that same mental freedom. The cows swish their tails beneath them on hot afternoon. They paint rivers so green that when a moorhen dives, one expects to see its feathers all green when it comes up again. I like to think of the fish balanced against the stream like flags blown out, and of water beetles slowly raiding domes of mud upon the bed of the river. And there's this real sense of vitality and dynamic interplay between the elements of the scene of nature that she imagines that's come about through wood, which is itself, a creative response to the solidity of concrete reality. So she's begun with concrete reality and then carried out this imaginative leap from wood to another source of intellectual and mental freedom and imagination, imagining the natural scene where the wood comes from as a way of evading the external world of circumstance. And so here they paint rivers so green, that personification of the tree gives it an enormous sense of power, and actually again uses what that ekphrastic language, that language that is about perceiving art, to show us that nature and anything that evades human control is good in the mind of this narrator for artistic representation. Again, I think when we think of the fish balanced against the stream like flags blown out, the simile gives us this, is an image actually of perhaps the death of patriotism, that nature and this world of imaginative freedom is the death of patriotism and the death of one of the most traumatic concepts of the external world. I like to think of the tree itself, first the close, dry sensation of being wood, and so she imagines herself into the position of wood there. Then the grinding of the storm, then the slow, delicious ooze of sap. So we've got this onomatopoeic description. This is the most poetic language, I think, in the story. And it becomes this final effort to imagine herself out of this world into the world of nature. I like to think of it too on winter's night, standing in the empty field with all leaves close furled, nothing tender exposed to the iron bullets of the moon, a naked mast upon an earth that goes tumbling, tumbling all night long. And so we've got here a range of different figurative devices here, that the trees are sort of seen as exposed and personified through that exposure. But also the iron bullets of the moon, this metaphor of the moon's beams being these kind of solid, threatening bullets to this naked mast upon an earth. There's this sense of it being extremely vulnerable and isolated, but this imagery, I think, tells us a great deal about the psychological state of the narrator, as perhaps the narrator is this kind of isolated and alienated and vulnerable individual. The song of birds must sound very loud and strange in June, and how cold the feet of insects must feel upon it. She's again imagining, empathizing with a tree as they make laborious progresses up the creases of the bark, or sun themselves upon the thin awning of the leaves and look straight in front of them with diamond-cut red eyes. One by one the fibres snap beneath the immense cold pressure of the earth. Then the last storm comes, and falling, the highest branches drive deep into the ground again. The imagery is cyclical there. Even so, life is done with. There are a million patient, watchful lives still for a tree all over the world, in bedrooms, in ships, on the pavement lining rooms where men and women sit after tea, smoking cigarettes. It's full of peaceful thoughts, happy thoughts, this tree. And so that full poetic speculation shows us here a dynamic juxtaposition of thought with action and reality with poetic images, like the vitality of the mind. So we've got here the a juxtaposition of the dynamism of thought that thought is capable of in this paragraph through its imaginative foray, with the sad, predictable, concrete world of the external world of Whitaker's table of presidency. This is what is possible in writing and in life. And there's a huge, deliberate contrast, I think, through her use of structure here. The placing of this poetic rendition of being a tree in relation to the sad external reality of Whitaker's almanac. I should like to take each one separately, but something is getting in the way. Where was I? What has it been all about? A tree, a river, the downs, Whitaker's almanac, the fields of asphodel. I can't remember a thing. Everything's moving, falling, slipping, vanishing. There is a vast upheaval of matter. Someone is standing over me and saying. And so here, this is where the imaginary world is retreating. There is an invasion of external reality here, and that's where these interruptions in the syntax come from, the questions and the sense of doubt through aporia that is, I think, a signature rhetorical trope here. We've been immersed in all of this reality, and now it's being questioned. Someone is standing over me and saying, I'm going out to buy a newspaper. Yes? Though it's no good buying newspapers. Nothing ever happens. Curse this war. God damn this war. All the same, I don't see why we should have a snail on our wall. Ah, the mark on the wall. It was a snail. So again, what we're seeing in this final, almost throwaway little exchange of dialogue is the narrator's husband. And I think this is suggested that it's Leonard Woolf, Virginia Woolf's husband, coming in just to say that he's going out to buy a newspaper. He is, importantly, going out into the external world. Even though that those newspapers reveal a world where nothing ever happens and that all the news is war. So again, you've got that tiny little revelation at the end of the story, like you do in Kew Gardens, where the external world and the approach of modernity presses in upon this individual trying to evade it. God damn this wall. I don't see why we should have a snail on our wall. And so what we've got in this final exchange is this ironic contrast between the vision of men and women, of the narrator and her husband. That his immediate way of perceiving the mark on the wall is to see it for its objective logical truth and to miss out on everything in the story that has just come before this, to reveal, to fail to understand all of the psyche and the intellectual depth and the imaginative power of this narrator's mind, and to actually go about destroying it without even trying. So it shows us again the distance between this husband and this narrator, the enormous chasms of psychological alienation that they have to overcome in order to connect with each other. But it also shows us the almost haphazard, casual way in which men have power over women and have control over this extremely powerful internal world that's being conjured here, but that can be destroyed with a throwaway remark in dialogue. So you have this enormous sense of deflation, I think, in the end of this story, that it resolves itself into a really bleak conclusion.